You learned to be quiet about your needs before you even had the words to name them. Picture this: you're 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table. Your parent is there, physically present, moving through the motions of making dinner, asking about homework, but when you try to tell them about the thing that's been sitting heavy in your chest all day, you watch their eyes glaze over. Not with cruelty, with absence. They're looking at you, but they're not seeing you, so you stop mid-sentence. You smile. You say never mind, and you learn in that moment the first lesson of emotional neglect. Your inner world is too much, too complex, too demanding for the space you occupy. And here's the thing that nobody tells you about emotional neglect: it doesn't announce itself with bruises or broken promises. It arrives in the silence between words, in the questions never asked, in the comfort never offered. You grow up in a house where your basic needs are met. There's food, there's shelter, maybe even love in some abstract, unexpressed form, but your emotional reality is treated like static noise. Background interference to be tolerated, not a signal worth tuning into. So you did what all intelligent, survival-oriented children do. You adapted. You became small, not physically but energetically. You learned to read every micro-expression, every shift in tone, every change in atmospheric pressure in your home. You became a student of other people's emotions because yours were inadmissible evidence in the court of family life. You turned your need for emotional connection inward, and you became your own parent, your own comforter, your own witness. And it worked. That's the core paradox. It kept you safe. It made you manageable. It turned you into the easy child, the one who never caused problems, who was mature beyond your years, who could handle things on your own. But now you're an adult who can't ask for help without feeling like you're committing a crime. You're someone who apologizes for taking up space, who feels guilty for having needs, who has mastered the art of being present for everyone except yourself. The very thing that protected you as a child, your ability to minimize yourself, to self-soothe in isolation, to never burden anyone with your internal weather, has become the prison you can't escape. You survived by learning to be invisible, and now, invisibility is the only way you know how to exist. Let's be clear about what emotional neglect actually is, because it's the most gaslit form of childhood trauma. It's not what happened to you, it's what didn't happen. It's the absence of attunement, the missing mirror. In developmental psychology, there's a concept called affect mirroring, introduced by British psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott and later expanded by Alan Score. It describes how a parent reflects a child's emotional state back to them, not just acknowledging it, but helping the child understand and regulate it. When a toddler falls and looks to their parent, they're not just seeking comfort, they're checking, is this bad, am I okay? A securely attached parent mirrors appropriate concern, validates the pain, and helps the child return to baseline. The child learns, my emotions are real, they're manageable, and I'm not alone in them. But in emotional neglect, that mirror is fogged, or absent entirely. Your parents weren't necessarily cruel. They may have been depressed, distracted, emotionally immature, or raised in the same barren emotional landscape they're now passing down to you. They fed you, clothed you, maybe even said they loved you. But when you reached for emotional co-regulation, you found nothing, no reflection, no resonance, just a void that taught you one thing: your internal life is not worthy of attention. This creates what attachment researchers call avoidant attachment, but it's more complex than that. You didn't just learn to avoid connection, you learned to avoid yourself. Neurologically, this has profound implications. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, in his research on trauma, emphasizes how chronic emotional neglect affects the development of the anterior cingulate cortex, the part of your brain responsible for emotional regulation and self-awareness. Without consistent co-regulation in childhood, this region remains underdeveloped. You literally have less neurological infrastructure for processing your own emotional experiences. Think of it like this: imagine trying to navigate a city without a map, without street signs, without anyone who speaks your language. That's your internal emotional landscape. You have all these feelings: fear, sadness, anger, joy, but no framework for understanding them, no vocabulary for naming them, and no confidence that they're valid enough to express. So they just accumulate, layer upon layer of unnamed emotion, stored in your body like emotional sediment. And here's where hypervigilance enters the picture. When children can't trust that their emotional needs will be met, they become environmental scanners. You learn to read your parents' moods before they fully formed. You became an expert at detecting danger, at anticipating needs, at making yourself useful enough to be kept around. This isn't paranoia, it's a sophisticated survival adaptation. But it comes at a cost. Your nervous system never learned how to rest. You're perpetually braced for emotional abandonment, scanning for evidence that you're too much, reading subtext in every neutral statement, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The cruelest part of emotional neglect is how it teaches you to abandon yourself before anyone else can. You became an expert at self-erasure. You learned that your sadness was melodrama, your anger was unreasonable, your joy was too loud, your fear was weakness. So you amputated those parts of yourself, not violently, quietly, methodically. You created an internal hierarchy where everyone else's emotional reality was legitimate and yours was provisional, always subject to review, never quite earning the right to exist without justification. And the grief of this, God, the grief of this, is that you don't even know what you lost. You can't mourn the attunement you never received because you have no reference point for what it would have felt like. It's like being born colorblind and spending your life wondering why everyone else seems to experience landscapes so much more vividly. You know something is missing, but you've been trained to believe the absence is in you, not in what you were given. Carl Jung wrote, "The foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering." But what happens when you're taught that your suffering isn't legitimate? That's the double bind of emotional neglect. You're suffering from the absence of acknowledgement for your suffering. It's pain wrapped in invisibility, creating a wound that can't be shown, a hurt that can't be validated because it has no form. Just this persistent, low-grade sense that something is profoundly wrong with you for needing what every human being needs: to be seen, to be held in someone else's awareness, to have your emotional reality matter. You learn to treat your own vulnerability as an inconvenience. Your need for reassurance became something shameful. Your desire for connection became something you had to earn through usefulness, through performance, through making yourself indispensable in practical ways while remaining utterly invisible in emotional ones. You became a caretaker, a problem solver, a rock for others, all while drowning in unwitnessed pain. Here's the philosophical weight of it. You didn't just lose connection with others. You lost connection with your own authentic self, the person you could have been, the one who felt free to express delight without tempering it, who could admit fear without shame, who could say, "I need you," without feeling like a burden. That person got locked away, stored in some unreachable part of your psyche. And in their place, you built a false self, a manageable version, the one who's fine, who's independent, who doesn't need much, who's just happy to be included. But the true self never dies, it just goes into exile, and from that exile it sends up flares, anxiety, depression, inexplicable rage, psychosomatic illness, and aching emptiness you can't name. These aren't pathologies, they're not proof that you're broken, they're your soul still screaming to be witnessed. The cost of emotional neglect is living as a ghost in your own life, present but not alive, functional but not free, visible but not seen. So what does this look like when you're 35 or 40 or 23? How does childhood emotional neglect follow you into conference rooms and bedrooms and therapist offices? You might be someone who can't accept compliments. When someone praises you, your immediate internal response is skepticism or deflection. Not because you're humble, but because genuine positive attention feels dangerous, exposing, like you're being seen under lights too bright. You've trained yourself to believe that visibility equals vulnerability equals abandonment. So you minimize your achievements, redirect credit, or simply don't register praise at all. Your neural pathways for receiving validation are atrophied from disuse. You become an adult who overfunctions in relationships. You're the one who remembers everyone's birthdays, who checks in, who anticipates needs, who solves problems before they're articulated. Not because you're naturally nurturing, though that may be part of it, but because your worth is contingent on your utility. You learn that love is something you do, not something you are. So you exhaust yourself performing care, terrified that if you stop being useful, you'll discover you were never actually wanted. The idea of being loved for simply existing, in your full complexity and occasional neediness, is a foreign language. You might struggle with alexithymia, the inability to identify and describe your own emotions. Someone asks, "How are you feeling?" and your mind goes blank, not because you're not feeling anything, but because you never developed the internal literacy to decode your emotional states. You might know you feel bad or off, but you can't distinguish between sadness, anger, disappointment, or fear. They're all just this undifferentiated discomfort. In therapy, when asked about your childhood, you say it was fine, and you genuinely believe it, because you have no framework for recognizing that absence as trauma. They become adults who panic at the thought of being too much. You police your own enthusiasm. You're terrified of sharing too many details, of texting first too often, of expressing too much excitement or pain or need. You've internalized the message that your emotional presence is inherently burdensome, so you ration it. You practice measured vulnerability, always ensuring you reveal less than the other person, always making sure you're not the needy one. The irony is that this creates exactly what you fear: superficial connections where you're never fully known, reinforcing the belief that you're unlovable. You might experience chronic emptiness or a sense of going through the motions, because when you spend decades suppressing your authentic emotional experience, you become disconnected from your own desires, preferences, and values. You're competent, maybe even successful, but there's this persistent hollow feeling. You're functioning, but you're not alive. You can't answer questions like, what do you want, or what brings you joy, without that familiar blankness. Not because you're incapable of desire, but because you've never been given permission to listen to your own internal compass. You become hypervigilant to others' emotional states while blind to your own. You can detect a shift in your partner's mood from 3 rooms away. You know when your boss is stressed before they do. You're empathic to the point of exhaustion, but not because you're naturally sensitive. You develop this radar as a survival mechanism. Meanwhile, your own body is screaming tension, headaches, digestive issues, insomnia, and you're barely registering it. You've been trained to outsource your attention, to focus everywhere except inward. They become adults who self-sabotage moments of genuine intimacy. When someone gets close, really close, you feel the urge to run, to create conflict, to find flaws, to preemptively end things. Because intimacy requires being known, and being known means someone might discover that you're as needy and flawed as you fear. It's safer to stay in relationships that are emotionally distant or to remain alone than to risk the vulnerability of being truly met. You've been conditioned to expect that depth equals disappointment. Here's what you need to understand: these are not character flaws. These are coping strategies that made perfect sense in the context they were developed. You didn't become this way because you're weak or damaged. You became this way because you were adapting to an environment where your emotional needs were systematically ignored. Your hypervigilance, your self-sufficiency, your minimizing, these were intelligent responses to an impossible situation. The work isn't to shame yourself for these patterns, it's to witness them, to see them clearly without the fog of self-judgment, to say, oh, this is what I learned, this is how I survived, and now I get to choose something different. So how do you heal from something that was never visible? How do you mourn an absence? How do you grieve for attunement you never received? The path begins with internal family systems, specifically the concept of reparenting your exiled child self. There's a part of you frozen at 7 or 10 or 13 that's still waiting for someone to ask, what do you need? What are you feeling? You're safe to tell me. The adult you needs to become that person, not by fixing or analyzing, but by simply being present. This might look like sitting quietly and asking your younger self, what did you need that you didn't get? And then crucially listening, not rushing to solutions, not dismissing the pain as in the past, just witnessing. You also need to practice somatic awareness, reconnecting with your body as the place where emotions live. Your feelings weren't just psychologically suppressed, they were physically stored. That tightness in your chest, that tension in your jaw, that constant knot in your stomach, these are your unprocessed emotions speaking in the only language they have left. Practices like breathwork, yoga, or simply placing your hand on your heart and asking, what am I feeling right now? These aren't new age platitudes. They're how you rebuild the neural pathways for self-awareness. Then there's the radical practice of choosing softness. This is terrifying for people raised in emotional neglect. Softness feels like weakness. Asking for help feels like failure. But healing requires you to practice being the needy person you were taught to despise. To text your friend and say, I'm having a hard day and I need support. To tell your partner, I need reassurance right now. To stop performing competence and independence and allow yourself to be human, which means sometimes being messy and uncertain and in need of co-regulation. You'll also need to engage in shadow work, the Jungian practice of integrating the parts of yourself you've disowned. All that neediness you've been running from, all that anger at the parents who failed you, all that grief for the childhood you deserved, these aren't enemies. They're parts of you that have been waiting in the dark, hoping to be welcomed home. The goal isn't to eliminate these parts, but to give them a place at the table. And perhaps most importantly, you need to find corrective emotional experiences. This means intentionally seeking relationships, therapeutic, platonic, or romantic, where your emotional reality is consistently validated, where someone says, that makes sense that you feel that way, instead of you're too sensitive, where your needs are met with curiosity instead of annoyance. These experiences literally rewire your brain. They prove that the story you were told, that you're too much, that your emotions don't matter, was a lie. The psychiatrist D.W. Winnicott wrote, the catastrophe you fear will happen has already happened. Read that again. The abandonment you're trying to avoid, it already occurred in childhood. What you're doing now, all the hypervigilance, all the self-erasure, is trying to prevent something that's already in the past. You're still that child scanning for safety in a home that wasn't safe, but you're not there anymore. You survived, and now you get to build something different. Healing from emotional neglect doesn't mean you'll suddenly become someone who effortlessly shares their feelings or never struggles with self-worth. It means you'll develop compassion for why you are the way you are. It means you'll stop gaslighting yourself about your own experience. It means you'll learn that your needs aren't weaknesses, they're the definition of being human. The goal isn't to become fixed, the goal is to become whole, to integrate all the parts you were taught to hide, to give yourself the attunement you were denied, to prove to that younger version of you that their emotions mattered then and they matter now. You were never too much, you were never the problem. You were a child who needed to be seen, and you deserved to be seen. And even though that didn't happen then, it can happen now. You can become the witness you always needed. Your story doesn't end with neglect, it begins with recognition. And from recognition comes the possibility of something you may have never experienced, being fully, unapologetically, vulnerably yourself, and discovering that this, finally, is enough. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more explorations into the hidden landscapes of the psyche. And remember, you're not broken, you're human, and that has always been and will always be more than enough.